Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is float. Let's take a look at some of the definitions or ways that we use this verb. The first way you might hear float used is to mean to rest or move on or near the surface of a liquid without sinking. I thought of this particular verb as I sort of reflected on the actions I did over the course of a vacation I had last week. So this isn't a great photo in the bottom right hand corner of your screen, but this is my head. These are my feet, right? And I am floating on the surface of the water, right? So I was actually in a river, the Bow River in Calgary, Canada, and we were just letting the current push us, right? So I would note this is different than swimming, right? I wasn't moving my arms or legs. I was just resting my body on this surface of the river. Another sort of related way that you hear this verb float used is to mean to be suspended freely in a liquid or a gas. So you might see references to or hear people describe things that are floating in space, right? So that would be the gas part of that definition. Another way to use the verb float is to talk about moving or hovering slowly and lightly in a liquid or in the air. So, as some people do different activities, they might describe a particular feeling that they're having as being hovering or floating through the air. Now, the next set of definitions sort of get away from that idea of being suspended or up in the air or kind of at the top of some liquid or some body of water, as my earlier example was. Definition 4 says to circulate a rumor or maybe an idea, some other sort of mental concept. So, I feel like when I read the news, many times I see things where it says reports are floating or rumors are floating, right? So that idea that people are sharing these different bits of information. Something related to that would be definition 5, to put forward some idea or suggestion. So sometimes in meetings, people will say, let me float this by you, kind of, right? And so they have an idea. That's what they're asking. They want to share this idea with you. And then last definition here, this is very specific to currency. So money for a particular country or group of countries as it may be, but it's when the value of that currency, that money, sort of fluctuates with supply and demand. So people aren't trying to sort of stop the value from going up and down, up and down. And so we use this verb float as well. You should know that float is a regular verb. To make the progressive form, all I need to do is add ing to form floating. The past tense and participle forms of this verb can be made by adding ed. Our base verb, float, ends in a T sound. So my past tense ending is going to make an id sound. I'm going to add an extra syllable as I say this. Floated, floated. Okay? Now, there are some additional phrasal verbs with float. You might hear to float around. So this generally means something is not in a specific location. So an example might be, I know that book is floating somewhere around here. Sometimes you hear this as people are trying to look or find a particular object, like in my example sentence. Another phrasal verb you might hear is to float into. This can have a couple different meanings. So one is this idea of something bobbing, which kind of means up and down, bobbing, drifting, or gliding into something or maybe some place. And again, most commonly, you're going to hear this used to describe air or water. So an example of this, the balloon floated into the air. So it's maybe someone was holding it full of helium, right? when you let go of that string, it starts to drift or glide into the air. A second way we use float into is just to mean to move forward into some place in sort of a slow or easy manner. An example of this: she floated into the room after receiving the good news. So kind of just an easy set of movements. Sometimes people will describe this feeling of like they feel like they're on a cloud, right? So that I hope you can see kind of a connection there with this particular verb, float. Another phrasal verb you might hear is float on. So this generally means we're describing something is drifting as if it's on the surface of something else. So an example here, the boat is floating on the river, right? So it's on the surface of, okay? You might also hear people use float upon. It has the exact same meaning there. So I could say the boat is floating upon the river. It doesn't alter the meaning at all. The last phrasal verb I have for us to discuss is float through. Now, many times this is going to be used to describe a person and how they are acting or behaving. And many times it's not used as a compliment, right? If we're describing someone else, we're saying they're moving or they're acting with sort of no awareness to other things or other people. Maybe they're not paying attention, or they have no enthusiasm, or it could even be some combination of all of those things. So an example of this might be, you can't float through college. You're going to need to study and work hard. You know, some parents are starting to say that to their children who are departing for their first year of college. So what the parent here is saying, I want you to be aware. I want you to pay attention and please be enthusiastic, right? That's the only way you're going to succeed and earn your college diploma. Now let's continue practicing our verb of the day in a couple different verb tenses. Today we're going to practice the simple present and the simple future using will. We'll start with the simple present. We use this verb tense to talk about our habits and routines. We also use it to discuss facts. Okay? And the thing about the simple present is that we really need to pay attention to our subject. If our subject in the affirmative is I, you, we, or they, I can just use the base verb. But if my subject is he, she, or it, I need to add an S to the end of my verb. And you can see that in my affirmative example here. He floats at least one new idea by his boss every week. Okay, so this is an idea, somebody who's making suggestions, sharing ideas. Maybe they're good ones, maybe they're not, but whatever the reason might be, this person seems to make it a habit to share some new idea each week. Now, if I want to make a negative sentence in the simple present, again, I've got to pay attention to my subject. If it's I, you, we, or they, I'm going to use do not and then the base verb. And if my subject is he, she, or it, I'll use does not and then the base verb. So notice, no S on the end of the verb here in the negative. Here's an example of a fact. Coins don't float in water. Okay, so remember our earlier definition about being at the surface, sort of the top of something, right? So if I put a coin in a glass, right, it's going to go to the bottom. It will not float. And that has to do with its density, but that gets into a whole nother science lecture. We'll stick to our verb tenses here. So lastly, if I want to make a yes or no question in the simple present, my structure is to start with do or does, whichever form matches my subject. Subject comes next, then the base verb. So again, no S here on the end of our simple present question. An example, do you float without a life vest? Okay, so many people are able to suspend themselves in water. Sometimes that makes others uncomfortable, so they would wear something that helps them use it. But this is just a yes or no question we're asking someone. Now let's take a look at the simple future using will. It's really common for us to use will when we're making predictions or making a promise for something in the future. And the nice thing about this form of the simple future is that it will be the same no matter what our subject is. So in the affirmative, I have my subject, I use will, and then I use the base verb. No special endings. Here's an example. A NASA telescope aboard a high-altitude balloon will float over the South Pole to study stellar feedback. Okay. So this is part of a prediction, a bit of a plan here in an article I read recently. So again, this idea of something kind of hovering through air. Now, if I want to make a negative simple future sentence, my structure will be to start with my subject, then use will not, or the contraction won't, and then the base verb. Here's another example. Nigeria won't float the naira, said the central bank governor. Saw a sentence very similar to this as I was looking for some examples of float. Here's tying back to our sixth definition about the currency. So what the central bank governor is saying is essentially they're not going to sort of interfere here with that fluctuation. And then finally, our yes or no question in the simple future. Our structure here is to start with will, then we'll have our subject, and then the base verb. So you can see that in my example here. Will the floodwaters float vehicles? Right? So it might be asking to make a prediction. I know I mentioned in yesterday's video there have been some awful floods throughout the United States in the recent weeks. And so here there have been reports that there could be more in certain areas due to really heavy rain totals, large quantities of rain. So I think I've read about a foot of water, and that can make a vehicle float or an automobile. Now let's take a moment to look at some words and a phrase related to our verb float. The first word we're going to look at is just the noun form of this word. So same spelling, same pronunciation. One way to use the noun float is to refer to something that is buoyant in water. So think of buoyant, staying on the surface, not going to the bottom. So an example of this might be, the pool doesn't allow people to use large floats in the water. So sometimes you might see something that looks like the picture in the bottom left part of the screen, right? We could call this a float. You'll hear other names and words for it as well. And sometimes some smaller pools say it gets too crowded, not as many people can be in if we have these large things that are buoyant. A second way to use the noun float is to refer to a platform that has been mounted on a truck that is either carrying people or decorations as part of a parade. So I've included another picture here. Lovely, looks like small town parade here, and some kids who've used balloons and signs. You can see people on this. We would refer to this as this organization's float in the parade. And you might hear someone ask you a question after watching a parade. What was your favorite float in the parade? Our third way to use the noun float is to refer to a particular dessert. So it's where some soda, a carbonated beverage, right, is put into a glass with a scoop of ice cream. And the idea is kind of the ice cream is floating in it. So I've included a picture here, and a really common one you might hear is root beer float. So using root beer with ice cream. And that's my question in my example here. Do you like root beer floats? I'm not a huge soda drinker, but I do think that is a fantastic little dessert or treat. Another noun you might hear is flotation. This can refer to the action of floating or the capacity, the ability to float, either in a gas or in a liquid. So An example might be, someone might be showing you an item and saying something like, this can be used for flotation if needed. This will help you float in water. A phrase you might encounter is to float one's boat. And so generally, you'll hear people either ask if something floats one's boat or express that maybe something doesn't float their boat. But this phrase is all about finding something or an activity to be exciting, enjoyable, or desirable to you. So an example of this might be, thanks for the invitation, but action movies don't float my boat. So this is kind of a true statement for me. I don't particularly get excited to go to these. So if a friend invited me to one now, I might go, I just don't find them enjoyable, right? You go, have a great time. Maybe I'll watch a different one with you in the future. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.